Today we're going to be making this very simple bead stitch beanie. I am going to be working with the Patons worsted wool yarn, and this is a size 4 medium weight yarn. And this is roughly 194 yards. I'm also going to be using a size G or 6 or 4 1/4 of a millimeter crochet hook. And our beanie does have a precursor video, and that is my how to crochet a chevron brim. And I will link to that in the description. And for that video, go ahead and crochet a brim that has 38 chevron stitches and join it like I show you how to do in that precursor video. And once you're done joining your brim, then we're going to chain 1 and turn this right side out. So from here, we're going to add an additional chain, and then we're going to start to place our bead stitches. And for our bead stitches, we want to be working in these sort of double loop areas right here. So you can see you have a knot and then 2 loops, a knot and then 2 loops. Well, we're going to be working in these 2 loops. So this chain 2 is going to count as your first double crochet. So we're going to place our bead stitch right here in the stitch directly behind our chain 2. So to do that, I want you to yarn over and insert your crochet hook in those 2 loops, then yarn over and pull up through a total of 3 times. Once you have your 3 yarn over and pull up throughs, then I want you to yarn over and drop all the loops on your crochet hook and chain 1. So now to repeat this process, we're going to place a double crochet in our next set of 2 loops right here. Then working back in our initial chain stitch, we're going to place our bead stitch. And don't forget to chain 1 at the end of your bead stitch. So now to place our subsequent beads, we're just going to place a double crochet in our next 2 loops where we have not already worked. Then working back under our last set of 2 loops where we've already worked, we're going to place another bead stitch. And as you can see, I am working over my tail, so if you want to do that, just line it up with your stitches and treat it like it is part of the edge of your brim. So now we're just going to repeat our bead stitch pattern going all the way around our row. And when you get to the end of your row, you should have a total of 40 bead stitches. And when you get to the end of your row, we're going to add an additional bead right here, joining our first stitch with our last stitch. So what we're going to do is place 1 double crochet back in this same stitch where we placed our very first bead of this row. Then we're going to place a bead stitch back in this last stitch where we've already worked. And we're going to slip stitch into the top of our first bead stitch to join our row. For our next row, we're going to chain 2 and then turn our work around so that we're working in the opposite direction. We're going to be working in these gaps between our beads rather than the top portion of our stitches. So we're basically going to place our bead stitch right here in this gap behind our chain 2. We're just going to yarn over and pull up through a total of 3 times. Then we're going to yarn over and drop all the loops on our crochet hook and place a chain 1 to finish out our bead. So for your next bead stitch, we're going to place a double crochet in the top of your next bead. Then we're going to place our bead stitch right here in the gap between our first and second bead. So that's going to be your pattern going all the way around your row, placing your double crochet in the top of your next bead, and then placing your bead stitch between your previous row's bead stitches. And at the end of the row, you should have a total of 40 beads. And at the end of your row, you're going to slip stitch into your first bead, and you're going to chain 2 and turn your work again. And from here, we're just going to repeat that last row over and over to build the body of our beanie. I went ahead and placed 7 rows of my bead stitch, and so now we're going to begin to place our decreasing rows. So just like before, we're going to chain 2 and turn our beanie around, and we're going to place our first 6 bead stitches like normal. And once you have your first 6 bead stitches, then we're going to crochet 2 bead stitches together. And we're going to do that by skipping the top of our next bead and placing our double crochet on the top of our following bead. So just like this. And from here, we're going to yarn over and pull up through twice in our first gap, and then once in this other gap here, our second gap. Then we're going to yarn over and drop all the loops on our crochet hook, and then we're going to chain 1 to complete our bead stitch. So that's going to be our pattern going all the way around our row, placing our next 6 bead stitches like normal, and then crocheting 2 beads together in our 7th and our 8th. And when you get to the end of your row, you should have a total of 35 bead stitches. And at the end of your row, you're just going to slip stitch into the top of your first bead stitch, and then we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And the pattern for this row is to place 1 bead stitch in your first 5 beads. Then you're going to crochet 2 beads together in your 6th and your 7th bead. And we're going to repeat that pattern going all the way around our row, and when we get done, we should have a total of 30 bead stitches. And at the end of your row, you're just going to slip stitch into the top of your first bead stitch, and we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And the pattern for this row is going to be to place 1 bead stitch in our first 4 beads, then we're going to crochet 2 beads together in our 5th and our 6th bead. And we're going to repeat that going around our row, and when we get done, we should have a total of 25 beads. And again, at the end of our row, we're just going to slip stitch into the top of our first bead stitch. Then we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And we're going to place our first 3 bead stitches like normal, and then we're going to crochet 2 together in our 4th and our 5th bead. And we're going to repeat this going around our row, and when we get done, we should have a total of 20 bead stitches. And again, at the end of our row, we're going to place a slip stitch in the top of our first bead. Then we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And the pattern for this row is going to be to place 2 decreasing stitches and then a regular stitch. So for this first decreasing stitch, we're going to go 2 gaps back rather than our typical gap behind our chain 2. So we're just going to yarn over and work our decreasing stitch like normal from here. So go ahead and place 2 decreasing bead stitches and then your regular bead stitch going all the way around your row, and you should have a total of 12 bead stitches when you're done. And again, at the end of our row, we're going to slip stitch into the top of our first bead stitch. And we're going to chain 2 and turn our work. And for this last row, we're just going to place decreasing bead stitches going all the way around. And when we get done, we should have a total of 6 beads. And at the end of your row, you're going to slip stitch into the top of your first bead stitch. And you might be close to running out of yarn. If so, you don't have to worry about cutting and tying off your yarn. Instead, we're just going to tie off our yarn. And with this extra tail, we are just going to weave this tail in and out of our last row of bead stitches so we can cinch it up. And once you're done weaving your tail, then you're just going to cinch it up like this, and we're going to tie it off using available loops near our tail. And once you're done tying off your tail, then you can trim it nice and short and draw it to the inside of your beanie. And the tail makes an excellent anchor for a pom-pom, so check the links in the description for my yarn and faux fur pom-poms. Thank you so much for working with me, and I hope you have a wonderful, awesome day.